Her ex-wife was mocked in court, then revealed as a billionaire's secret daughter. Music. The courtroom felt less like a place of justice and more like a gilded cage, trapping Eleanor in a web of condescension and legal maneuvering. She sat alone, the threadbare fabric of her dress a stark contrast to the opulent attire surrounding her. Her ex-husband, Marcus Thorne, sat across the aisle, radiating smugness in his tailored suit, a monument to his success, a success she had silently nurtured. Beside him, his glamorous fiancée, Isabella, whispered and giggled, their shared amusement a cruel symphony to Eleanor's ears. Marcus's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a shark in human form, painted a degrading portrait of Eleanor as a penniless, desperate woman, clinging to the past and grasping for what she didn't deserve. The judge's weary sigh was like a death knell to Eleanor's fragile hope. All she'd ever wanted was a fair settlement, a recognition of her contribution to Marcus's empire. But in this, her darkest hour, a quiet man entered the room, his presence subtle yet significant, carrying a secret that would shatter the carefully constructed narrative and rewrite her life. The air in the courtroom was thick with the musty scent of aged legal documents and the heavy weight of judgment. Eleanor Vance, despite the tremors of anxiety coursing through her, kept her back ramrod straight, a posture perfected over 12 long years of quiet endurance and unspoken sacrifices. Across the polished expanse of mahogany and privilege, Marcus looked every bit the stranger she knew him to be. His bespoke suit, woven from the finest wool, likely cost more than she earned in a year. His lawyer, Mr. Harrison, with his predatory grin and eyes that glittered with cold calculation, was a wolf draped in expensive wool, his voice a silken weapon designed to cut and destroy. "You are seeking 50% of Mr. Thorne's considerable assets?" Harrison's voice dripped with condescension, each word a carefully aimed barb. "Yes," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible above the hushed murmur of the courtroom. "That is what the law provides." A ripple of mocking laughter emanated from Marcus's side of the room. Harrison, emboldened, smirked. "What we are truly here to determine is the extent of your, shall we say, contribution." Eleanor's mind flashed with a montage of memories. The 2 grueling jobs she juggled, waitress by day, office cleaner by night, sacrificing her own aspirations so Marcus could dedicate himself to building his company. She remembered typing his business proposals late into the night, brewing endless pots of coffee, acting as the silent bedrock upon which his dreams were built. "I supported my husband," she stated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength, fueled by a spark of defiance. "I managed our household so he could focus entirely on his business." "You mean you did the chores?" Harrison chuckled dismissively, sweeping away a decade of sacrifice with a careless wave of his hand. A commendable, if unremarkable, exercise in domesticity. He proceeded to dissect her present life for the court's consumption. Her humble 1-bedroom apartment, her meagerly paid job as a part-time librarian's assistant, her $24,000 a year existence. He twisted her reality into a narrative of dependency, portraying her as a parasite clinging to Marcus's success. She risked a glance at Marcus, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of the man she had loved. But his eyes were cold, devoid of warmth or empathy. Next to him, Isabella whispered something in his ear, and he responded with a smile, a private moment of shared cruelty. They were a team united against her. Eleanor was merely an obstacle to be removed, a nuisance to be swatted away. Utterly defeated, Eleanor fled the courtroom during the afternoon recess. She sought refuge on a secluded wooden bench in a quiet corridor, the chill of the approaching evening seeping through her thin blazer. She felt hollowed out, drained of all hope. All she wanted was fairness, a modicum of justice. But in Marcus's world, fairness was a luxury she simply couldn't afford. Her lawyer, Sarah, a young woman with fiery spirit but limited resources, found her huddled on the bench, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. "Don't let them get to you," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's a bully," Eleanor whispered, the words laced with despair. "It's his strategy. He wants to break you down. It's working, Eleanor countered, her voice barely audible. Even the judge looks at me like I'm something he scraped off his shoe. We need something concrete. Eleanor, did you ever attend business meetings? Help with the source code? Anything? Eleanor shook her head, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. No, he always said I wouldn't understand. He said it was to protect me from the stress. Now, with painful clarity, she saw the truth. He wasn't protecting her. He was deliberately excluding her, methodically writing her out of his success story. As she sat there, the sterile surroundings amplifying her sense of isolation, her mind drifted back to the lonely emptiness of her childhood. An orphan, shuffled between a series of indifferent foster homes, she had no memories of her parents, no tangible connection to her past. Her only link to the family she never knew was a simple silver locket she always wore. Inside, nestled against a faded velvet lining, was a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a woman she assumed was her mother. Tucked behind it was a minuscule, folded piece of paper, bearing a single elegantly written name, Alistair Finch. It had always been a dead end, a forgotten ghost, a name without a face or a story. She was about to close the locket, dismissing the familiar pang of longing, when a man in an impeccably tailored gray suit paused at the end of the corridor. He wasn't a lawyer. She was certain of that. He had been observing the proceedings all morning with an unnerving stillness, his presence a silent question mark in the crowded room. His sharp, intelligent eyes met hers for a fleeting second, and she felt a strange, unsettling jolt. There was no pity in his gaze, only a cool, calculating assessment, as if he were cataloging her very essence. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. Eleanor dismissed him as just another spectator drawn to the public spectacle of her unraveling. The afternoon session was even more brutal than the morning. Harrison called a financial analyst to the stand, a soulless automaton who systematically dismantled any claim she had to Marcus's company. From a purely financial and legal standpoint, the analyst declared, his voice echoing in the silent room, her contribution was, in essence, zero. It was over. Eleanor knew it. She could feel her last shred of hope dissolving into the sterile air of the courtroom. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to deliver his verdict, the words heavy with finality. In light of the evidence presented, the court is inclined to. He was abruptly cut off as the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open with unexpected force. The man from the corridor strode in, followed by two imposing figures who looked more like corporate bodyguards than legal aides. "Your Honor, forgive the interruption," the man said, his voice calm yet commanding, cutting through the oppressive silence. "My name is Julian Croft. I am senior counsel for Finch Global Enterprises." A collective murmur swept through the courtroom, a wave of whispered recognition and disbelief. Finch Global, the legendary conglomerate, a name synonymous with unimaginable wealth and global influence. Judge Albright, visibly flustered, stammered, I don't see what business Finch Global could possibly have here." Mr. Croft, unfazed by the judge's agitation, didn't even glance in his direction. He looked directly at Eleanor, a strange, almost reverent expression flickering across his face. "We believe Ms. Vance's true assets have been grossly underestimated." Harrison, sputtering with indignation, shot to his feet. "Objection! This is an outrageous interruption. Your Honor, I demand." "Oh, I believe I do have standing, Counselor," Croft said, his voice laced with steel. He opened his briefcase with a deliberate flourish and withdrew a thick, leather-bound document. "I am here to execute the last will and testament of my employer, Alistair Finch, who passed away 48 hours ago." Another collective gasp filled the courtroom. The death of Alistair Finch, the world's most reclusive billionaire, would be monumental news. Croft turned his piercing gaze fully on a stunned Eleanor, his eyes conveying a message she couldn't yet comprehend. He named a sole beneficiary, his only child, his daughter. He took a deliberate step forward, his presence radiating quiet power. A woman known to this court as Eleanor Vance, but known to us as Eleanor Alistaster Finch. The room fell into a deafening silence. The silence in the courtroom was profound, amplifying the frantic beating of Eleanor's heart in her ears. Eleanor Alistaster Finch. The name felt alien on her tongue, yet the name etched in her locket, Alistaster Finch, was now echoing through the hallowed halls of justice, transforming her reality in ways she couldn't have imagined. It was impossible, yet somehow it was undeniably true. Marcus's face was a mask of utter disbelief, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. Mr. Harrison looked thunderstruck, his sharp legal mind short-circuiting, unable to process the seismic shift in the landscape. Judge Albright looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his composure shattered. "Mr. Croft, are you certain?" The judge managed to stammer, his voice trembling. "This is highly irregular. Our certainty is absolute, Your Honor," Croft replied coolly, his voice unwavering. "We have DNA confirmation, sealed birth records. The evidence is irrefutable." He placed the will on the clerk's desk with a definitive thud, the sound reverberating through the stunned silence. "It names Eleanor Alistaster Finch as the sole inheritor of his entire estate. His properties, his companies, his entire fortune. The transfer is already in motion." Eleanor felt the world tilt on its axis. Her father. She had a father who had been searching for her, longing for her. The weight of it was crushing and exhilarating, a paradox of grief and joy. Every lonely birthday, every holiday spent yearning for a connection, every unanswered question about her past. It had all led here, to this moment of revelation. She wasn't an unwanted footnote in someone else's story. She was the entire book. It was Marcus who broke the silence, leaping to his feet, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is insane. It's a trick. She's a librarian's assistant. For God's sake, she's nobody." His panic was palpable, raw and untamed. He wasn't just losing a legal argument. He was watching his entire reality crumble before his eyes. Harrison, desperately trying to salvage the situation, recovered his composure and attempted to spin the narrative. "Your Honor, this changes nothing. This alleged inheritance occurred after their separation. It is not a marital asset. My client's offer of $250,000 still stands." Julian Croft turned his head slowly, a thin, humorless smile playing on his lips. "You misunderstand, counselor. I am not here to discuss Miss Finch's inheritance. I am here to discuss the assets that were already hers during the marriage." A new wave of confusion and disbelief swept through the room. "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "While Mr. Finch was tragically unable to locate his daughter for many years," Croft explained with cold precision, his words falling like shards of ice, "he never stopped providing for her. On her 18th birthday, he established a blind trust in her name. He deposited funds into it every birthday, every holiday. As of this morning, that trust, which legally belonged to Eleanor Vance throughout her entire 12-year marriage, is valued at approximately $750 million. Marcus made a strangled, gasping sound, as if he'd been punched in the gut. Harrison's face went white as a sheet, his carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbling. The implication was devastating, a cruel twist of fate. According to the very laws of equitable distribution Harrison had been preaching, Marcus wasn't divorcing a poor woman. He was divorcing a multimillionaire. And he was entitled to none of her fortune, while she was still legally entitled to half of his. "So you see," Croft continued, his voice dripping with icy disdain, "we are not here to ask for more for Mr. Thorne. In fact, we are here to make him an offer." He turned to Eleanor, his gaze softening with a hint of warmth. "Miss Finch, with your permission, we will withdraw your claim for 50% of Thorne Innovations." A flicker of desperate hope lit Marcus's eyes, a glimmer of salvation in the face of impending ruin. "And in its place," Croft said, turning his lethal gaze back to Marcus, "we will be filing a counterclaim. We will be demanding 50% of all marital assets. That includes Mr. Thorne's $90 million company and, of course, Ms. Finch's $750 million trust. We believe Mr. Thorne's fair share comes to approximately $420 million. We are prepared to write him a check today. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps, murmurs, and exclamations. Marcus Thorne, who had mocked his wife for her perceived poverty, had just been offered a colossal payout, a sum that would have been unimaginable just hours before. But it wasn't a victory. It was the ultimate humiliation. His entire empire was a mere rounding error in his ex-wife's vast finances. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been annihilated. In the chaotic aftermath, Judge Albright hastily adjourned the court, eager to escape the fallout of the explosive revelation. Marcus remained frozen in his seat, a ghost of his former self, his arrogance and self-assurance completely shattered. Isabella, his fiancée, was already subtly edging her chair away from him, her expression a mixture of awe and terror directed at Eleanor. Eleanor was escorted to a private judge's chamber by Croft's efficient security team, their presence a silent testament to her newfound status. She sank into a plush leather chair, her legs finally giving way beneath her, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what had transpired. My father. Why didn't I know? Julian Croft's professional demeanor softened. His eyes filled with a hint of compassion. He tried, Eleanor. I promise you, he tried. He proceeded to tell her the story, a tale of love, loss, and relentless pursuit. Her mother, Alana, the love of Alistaster's life, had died in childbirth. In his profound grief, Alistaster was betrayed by a jealous relative, a distant cousin who craved his wealth and power. This cousin gave the baby Eleanor to the state system and told Alistaster that she, too, had perished. He believed you were gone for 5 years, Croft said, his voice heavy with sorrow. It wasn't until a deathbed confession that he learned the truth. He spent the next decades, and billions of dollars, searching for you. We found you 3 months ago. He was overjoyed. He was terminally ill, Eleanor. He was trying to hang on long enough to meet you. His greatest regret was that he ran out of time. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, not tears of sadness or self-pity, but tears of a profound, earth-shattering sense of connection. She wasn't an accident, a mistake, an unwanted burden. She was loved. She had been sought after, longed for, cherished from afar. Meanwhile, in the empty courtroom, Marcus's shock curdled into venomous rage. She knew. He hissed at Harrison, his voice dripping with fury. That whole act. She was playing me. Marcus, that's impossible. Harrison reasoned, his forehead slick with sweat. Croft said they only found her 3 months ago. Don't be naive. Marcus spat, his ego refusing to accept the truth. This is her revenge. We fight this. We challenge the will, the trust. We argue she hid assets. Harrison looked at him as if he were insane. Marcus, they are Finch Global. You were just offered a life-changing sum of money. Take the win. It's not a win. Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the table, his face contorted with fury. It's a disgrace. I will not be reduced to a footnote in my ex-wife's charity case. The grudge took root, dark and twisted, festering in the fertile ground of his wounded pride. He would try to tear her down, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. The days that followed were a blur for Eleanor, a whirlwind of activity and overwhelming emotion. She was a headline, splashed across every newspaper and website. The billionaire Cinderella, the orphan librarian who had inherited a global empire. Julian Croft and his team became her shield, managing the relentless press coverage and walking her through the labyrinthine corridors of the empire she now owned. She sat in meetings with powerful board members, titans of industry who spoke a language of acquisitions, market caps, and leveraged buyouts that was utterly foreign to her. She felt like an imposter, drowning in the weight of her new crown, terrified of making a misstep that could jeopardize everything her father had built. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Croft found her staring out the penthouse window, gazing at the glittering cityscape below. I feel like I'm going to break it all, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I know, Croft said gently, his voice filled with understanding. Allister didn't leave you his fortune just because you were his daughter. He believed you had the character to wield it, the strength and compassion to make a difference. He gestured to a sealed crate in the corner of the room, its presence somehow comforting. He left these for you. Later, alone, Eleanor opened the crate with trembling hands. Inside were her father's personal effects, well-worn books, a collection of classical records, and several thick, leather-bound journals. With a deep breath, she opened the first one, its pages filled with her father's elegant handwriting. They told me my Eleanor was gone, she read, her voice thick with emotion. Today, I learned that was a lie. She's out there, somewhere in the world. I will not rest until I find her. She read for hours, tears blurring the elegant script, losing herself in her father's words, his hopes, and his unwavering determination. He wrote to her as if she were there, present in the room, detailing his business philosophy, his values, and his dreams for her future. Money is a tool, Eleanor. One entry read, "It reveals character. It does not create it. I pray you never lose your heart, for it is a far greater treasure than anything I can ever leave you." Through his words, she finally met her father, the man she had never known but had always longed for. He had trusted that the little girl lost to the world would grow into a woman of integrity, a leader with a heart. He hadn't been looking for a CEO to run his company. He had been looking for a person of substance to carry on his legacy. And in his words, she began to see herself, not as the penniless librarian scorned by her ex-husband, but as the woman her father had believed her to be, capable, compassionate, and worthy of his love. Empowered by her father's words and filled with a newfound sense of purpose, Eleanor's resolve was immediately tested. Marcus, true to his word, had rejected the $420 million settlement, his pride outweighing his common sense. His lawyer, looking deeply uncomfortable, filed a motion to contest her trust fund, claiming marital fraud and alleging that she had deliberately concealed her assets throughout their marriage. It was a ludicrous, desperate move designed only to harass her, to drag her through the mud and inflict as much pain as possible. Marcus then gave a series of tabloid interviews, his face a mask of faux sincerity, his words dripping with venomous accusations. She played the long game, he claimed, his eyes filled with manufactured outrage. Our entire marriage was a lie. She pretended to be simple, while sitting on a secret fortune. The public narrative began to waver, swayed by Marcus's carefully crafted lies. Could she really have been unaware of her own wealth? Could she have been deceiving him all along? Eleanor watched one of the interviews, her face impassive, her emotions carefully controlled. Just a few weeks ago, his words would have shattered her, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. Now they felt like pebbles against a fortress wall, insignificant and ultimately harmless. She had spent 12 years being defined by Marcus Thorne, reduced to a caricature of his making. She was done. She had reclaimed her identity, her power, and her voice. She picked up the phone and called Julian Croft, her voice clear and steady, devoid of fear or hesitation. "Julian," she said, "schedule a full board meeting for tomorrow morning." This time I introduced myself. The Finch Global headquarters was a monument to power, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that dominated the city skyline. As Eleanor stepped into the boardroom, 40 of the most brilliant and ruthless minds in the corporate world watched her, their hawk-like eyes assessing the new heir, searching for any sign of weakness or inexperience. She walked to the head of the table, to her father's chair, the seat of authority and responsibility, but she did not sit. Instead, she stood tall, her shoulders squared, her gaze unwavering. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and measured, filling the vast room with its quiet strength. "I am Eleanor Finch. I know you have questions. I am not my father. I do not have his experience, his knowledge, or his years of business acumen. For the past 12 years, I was a homemaker and a librarian's assistant, living a quiet, unremarkable life." Uneasy glances were exchanged around the table, a silent chorus of doubt and skepticism. But I have learned about his principles, his values, and his unwavering commitment to integrity. He despised bullies, and he trusted that I would carry on his legacy. Her tone shifted, becoming sharp and decisive, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. Which brings me to my first official act. She nodded to an aide standing near the door, and a screen lit up behind her, displaying Marcus's smirking face from one of his tabloid interviews. This is Marcus Thorne. He has chosen to engage in a campaign of harassment against me, and by extension this company, attempting to undermine my authority and damage our reputation. She clicked a remote, and a series of slides detailing Thorne Innovations appeared, revealing the intricate web of dependencies that held his company together. His primary server contract is with a subsidiary of ours. His largest client relies on our shipping network. His most valuable patent uses an algorithm licensed from us. A murmur went through the board, a collective gasp of understanding as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Mr. Thorne is a tenant in a house he believes he owns, Eleanor said, her voice cold as ice. And I am the landlord, and I have decided to evict him. She turned off the screen, her gaze sweeping across the room, holding each board member accountable. Julian, terminate the server contract. Inform his largest client their logistics costs will increase by 300%. And do not renew the algorithm license. With 3 simple sentences, she had surgically dismantled Marcus's company, cutting off its lifeblood and condemning it to a swift and certain demise. It would be bankrupt in a matter of months, its assets stripped bare, its reputation irrevocably tarnished. As for the divorce, she concluded, her voice resonating with quiet determination. We are withdrawing the $420 million offer. My original claim stands. I will be taking my 50% of his company. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. When it collapses, those shares will be worthless. But I will have made my point. I will have sent a clear message to anyone who dares to underestimate me, or to challenge the legacy of my father. She looked at the stunned board, her eyes blazing with unwavering resolve. My father despised bullies. Mr. Thorne is a threat to this company, and to my family. Today, that threat has been ended. The collapse of Thorne Innovations was swift and merciless, a spectacular implosion that reverberated throughout the financial world. The news hit the markets like a tidal wave, sending shockwaves through the industry. Clients fled, investors panicked, and debts mounted, spiraling Marcus into a vortex of financial ruin. His pride and his identity, so closely intertwined with his wealth and success, were reduced to ashes, leaving him a hollow shell of his former self. His fiancée left him, taking her ring, his credit cards, and his last shred of dignity with her. The final court date was a stark contrast to the first, a study in the shifting tides of fortune. Eleanor was serene and composed in a simple cream-colored dress, her face radiating quiet strength and unwavering confidence. Marcus, on the other hand, was a shrunken, haggard ghost of the man he had once been, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped with defeat. The proceedings were brief, almost perfunctory. His lawyer meekly accepted Eleanor's original claim, 50% of a now bankrupt company, a prize worth less than the paper it was written on. A financial analyst presented the grim numbers, confirming the utter devastation of Thorne Innovations. The company had a net value of -$3 million, meaning Eleanor's share was a debt of $1. $5 million. Her lawyer stood, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Your Honor, in a show of good faith and a desire to close this chapter and move forward, Miss Finch has decided to graciously forgive Mr. Thorne's half of the debt. It was the final blow, the quietest, most devastating act of charity imaginable, an act that underscored the infinite gulf between them. She was writing him off, dismissing him as a footnote in her extraordinary story, a cautionary tale of hubris and misplaced pride. After the gavel fell, signaling the end of the legal battle, Eleanor walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance, leaving Marcus to wallow in the humiliating consequences of his own arrogance. Eleanor didn't go to her penthouse, the symbol of her newfound wealth and power. Instead, She asked her driver to take her to the small, run-down public library where she used to work, a place of quiet refuge and simple pleasures. Walking through the familiar aisles, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, a return to her roots. She ran her fingers over the worn spines, remembering the hours she had spent lost in the pages of countless stories, finding solace and inspiration in the written word. She realized that her old life hadn't been a weakness, a source of shame. Her quiet nature, her love of books, her ability to endure hardship with grace and resilience, these were not flaws. They were the source of her strength, the qualities that had allowed her to survive and thrive in the face of adversity. Marcus's strength had been borrowed from money and status, external markers of success that had ultimately proven to be fleeting and hollow. Hers was innate, a deep well of inner fortitude that had been forged in the crucible of hardship. She hadn't merely inherited a fortune. She had inherited a responsibility, a legacy of compassion and integrity. Her victory wasn't in crushing Marcus, in reducing him to a pile of ashes. It was in the quiet realization of her own worth, a worth that had been there all along, waiting to be discovered, nurtured, and unleashed upon the world.